welcome back to the Formal Review. Today, we'll be having a very special episode. Now sit back, maybe grab a drink, and let's talk about this movie.
What's up, everyone?
I have shed innocent blood.
Welcome.
Excuse me. Sorry about that.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Welcome back to the Formal Review. This is Season 4, Episode 16, and I thank you all for tuning in once again. Now, happy October, everyone. We have reached the first full month of fall.
Makes me want to buy school supplies. I would send you a bouquet of newly sharpened pencils if I knew your name and address.
So with October, obviously, comes Halloween.
Can you dig it?
So with that, what I'm going to be doing over the course of this next month is be looking back at Halloween/horror movies.
Come and play with us.
Now, these movies were chosen by all my followers. You voted, and these are the films that you chose. And I thank you very much for casting your vote.
I'm your number one fan.
Next year, you could give me suggestions of what films you want me to analyze next year, and they'll be up for contention. So some of these films in the month of October I have seen before, and some I haven't. But the first analysis is going to be on one of my favorite horror films of all time, the 1968 horror classic, Rosemary's Baby. So stay tuned.
Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions, like how do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps that people like to listen on? How do I make money from my podcast? The answer to every single one of those questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing my podcast. And best of all, it's absolutely 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with some great sponsors. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. Again, that's anchor.fm/start. And I can't wait to hear your podcast.
Now, before I get into anything, I do want to preface this episode with a slight spoiler warning. However, this movie did come out in 1968, so you have had time to see it. But I will say, if you care about spoilers, go watch this film. It's really, really fantastic. And then come back and hear what I have to say about it so you fully understand anything. Now, this episode will be covering some very adult themes. So if you have any issues with that, I would suggest not listening to the entire thing. In short, I love the movie. But you have no issues listening to adult themes or potential any spoilers and you haven't seen it, keep listening. Also, I know I talk about this at the end, but the data shows that most people don't listen to that part, so I want to talk about it here and reiterate the importance of leaving reviews on your favorite subscription services. I do read those because I do want to grow, because these episodes are really for all you listeners out there, and I want to keep this entertaining. So what do you want to hear? Do you want to hear games? Do you want to hear more of the 4K stuff? Do you want to hear me talk about a certain movie? If you want to come on and talk to me about something, if you want to debate, I'm always open to do stuff like that, so you can always reach out to me on social media. I always want to grow and improve, and
Just because something works doesn't mean that it cannot be improved.
so if there's something that you want me to improve on, let me know, and I will grow as such. Anyway, Rosemary's Baby is a 1968 psychological horror film written and directed by Roman Polanski and stars Mia Farrow, John Cassavetes, Ruth Gordon, Sidney Blackmer, Maurice Evans, Ralph Bellamy, Angela Doreen, Clay Turner, and in his first film, Charles Grodin. Follows this young pregnant wife who living in Manhattan who starts to suspect that her older neighbors are members of a satanic cult and are grooming her to use her baby for their rituals. Now, this film is based on the 1967 novel of the same name written by Ira Levin. Now, this book at the time was sold over 4 million copies and was among the top best horror novels of the 1960s. With this novel, Levin basically tapped into the cultural zeitgeist in a way that really few have done before that, or even since. And Polanski really executed that aspect of the book absolutely flawlessly in this film. He really studied the book book obsessively, marking pages and engaged in long conversations with Levin about everything in the novel, from the story itself to even just the wardrobe details. Now, this wasn't Polanski's first film, but it was his first adaptation of an existing work, and as such, he was fairly hesitant to change things when it comes to the big screen version of the story. And this is one thing that a lot of directors struggle with when it comes to adapting a book for the big screen, because there's a lot of details that are taken out for length purposes, or it doesn't really add anything to the actual story, and then there's obviously artistic license. But with this film, he was able to make one of the most faithful depictions of a novel ever brought to screen in the history of filmmaking. When it originally was released, it earned almost universal acclaim from film critics and won many nominations and awards, and it's regarded as one of the greatest horror movies of all time. Then in 2014, it was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress, being deemed, quote, culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. When it was released, it was nominated for 2 Academy Awards. One was for Best Adapted Screenplay, and the other was for Best Supporting Female Actor with Ruth Gordon. Now, Ruth Gordon was the only one to win the award. And today, this film is widely regarded as a classic. And even with the issues that I have with Rotten Tomatoes, after 73 critic reviews, it has a 96% approval rating with a rating of 8.8 out of 10. And an audience rating after 50,000 plus ratings of 87% with a rating of 4.1 out of 5. With a critic consensus of a frightening tale of Satanism and pregnancy that is even more disturbing than it sounds, thanks to convincing and committed performances by Mia Farrow and Ruth Gordon. And then on Metacritic, after 15 critic reviews, it has a 96 rating, and after 192 user reviews, as an 8.2 rating, and it is regarded with universal acclaim and a Metacritic must-see. But why? And that's what I'm going to go into today in this analysis, because this film is a masterful example of horror realism. And for those who don't know what this is, essentially psychological horror films can be put into either fantastical or realistical categories. The former is more about creating new fears in an audience, such as the boogeyman or monsters. And the latter deals with more fears that we have about ourselves and the world that we actually live in. It takes something that many of us take for granted and then takes that away from us. And films in this category deal with fears that really boil down ultimately to the basic fear of losing control. And unfortunately though, a lot of new age so-called horror films fall into the former category of fantasy, and they rely on jump scares and imagery that rather than focusing on a story. Realistic horror films have somewhat taken a backseat though, have started to come back with films such as Get Out, Us, and even the newest Candyman that came out earlier this year. In the 1970s, films like The Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Omen were able to bridge this gap between this horror fantasy and horror realism. They were able to take the scary aspects of the former and combine it with a somewhat grounded story of the current world that we live in, which even makes the horror even more horrific, if you will. And one of the films that did this in the best way was this film by Polanski. He's able to take real life fears such as urban living, religion, pregnancy, and similar to the other films in this genre, the loss of control. And it relies on this slow build and this tense atmosphere to really show the horrors of this film. And the end result of this shows the horror of being a woman from a woman's point of view. It shows some of the fears of pregnancy and trust and the body that really no other film does. Rosemary ends up not being able to trust her neighbors. And it also shows how women sometimes reject quote-unquote traditional roles, or in this case, the traditional roles rejecting them. And essentially, Rosemary's literal pregnancy is an invasion. Yes, there's obviously the religious aspects of the film, but that's not why this film is so scary. The film has a man take control of his wife's body and then give it away in the most perverted and literally scarring way possible. It really changes her whole point in life, and she has no choice in this. And this is what the book did. It shows how a devil's victory at the end and is not because he defeats feminism in a way. It's because he rules in a world that feminism can't exist. It also looks at how the people that you think you can trust most in this world are sometimes the scary. Sometimes our nightmares don't come from the outside world, but they come from under our own roof. Now, it's slightly odd to give praise to Polanski doing this, who infamously fled the United States after pleading guilty to having sex with a minor. However, no matter his problems, this film is about men making decisions about women's bodies behind their backs. Now, in the book and in the film, Guy is this soulless and selfish and egotistical man. He only wants to focus on his career, and thus he starts to ignore Rosemary. Now, eventually, Rosemary realizes that Guy doesn't love her, and obviously will gladly sacrifice her body, her health, safety, and also just integrity for his career, and nothing else matters. But throughout the film and the book, she can't do anything to resist and or stop him. And in some of the situations that she goes through, it's because the entire world is against her. Her neighbors spy on her and tell on her if she's had someone over that they think is suspicious. And then when she has to deal with the doctor, he gives her bad advice. And then when she tries to get a second opinion, her husband refuses to pay. And then when she goes anyways, all of the doctors revert back to the first one. As such, she then starts to second guess herself, and then she starts to want to put her husband and child first. And as such, this limits her ability to keep her own sanity. Now, for example, when some of her friends try to go to another obstetrician for her pain, she immediately declares, "I won't have an abortion," which no one even suggested. Now, throughout the rest of the story, she doesn't even want to consider that possibility. And even though she's been dealing with this pain for months, and obviously her health is at risk, she is prioritizing this baby over her own life, and unknowingly willing to sacrifice herself for this patriarchal devil, literally and figuratively. Now, on top of that, the most disturbing aspect is Rosemary's reaction when she is assaulted. She's obviously more than half unconscious when the devil is summoned to rape her. When she wakes up, she has these scratches on her back, which Guy explains that he had sex with her while she was unconscious, which he laughs about. Now, understandably so, Rosemary is upset, but then starts to make justifications for his actions and starts to defend him better than, honestly, he's defending himself. And the irony here is that this crime against her is literally going to bring about the apocalypse, and yet somehow it's still her fault. Now, this effect by the patriarchy really goes beyond a verbal aspect. It's even biological, as shown through giving birth to the Antichrist. Now, in the final act of this story, the devil worshippers take the baby from Rosemary after it's born. They tell her that it died. But because she doesn't believe them, she starts to see things and put together pieces of the puzzle and see that they're most likely not telling her the truth. And eventually she discovers that the child is alive in the neighbor's apartment. The crib is dressed in this black cloth and has this place of pride in this room, and what looks like a christening party is in progress. She has this knife and she's ready to kill to get her baby back. Now, the room then falls silent when she looks at the crib only to cry and screams out when she first sees it. And then she finally realizes that her child is the Antichrist with these yellow eyes and claws and hands on feet. And this other character replies he has his father's eyes, which she immediately disregards, then becomes repulsed, and she starts to remember everything about her rape, about how this being, this infant being, came about. And she's repulsed by this, but then her mothering instincts take over. When the demon baby begins to cry, she immediately gets that it's because this one woman is rocking her bassinet too quickly. And they have this connection even though they've been separated for days since the birth. And it's this link is animal and spiritual. And this patriarchy that the devil has is something that she can't escape. It knows her literally and figuratively inside and out. In this nightmare of a story, the devil and the patriarchy rules, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. And during this final 25 seconds of brilliant filmmaking, Farrell pours her absolutely steady gaze into the crib, and this smile and acceptance come across her face. And this is the horror of this movie. Polanski is able to take these long camera shots to take this social commentary of the patriarchy and tie it to an absolutely horrific film. A lot of films nowadays would have shown the spawn of Satan and his eyes. However, this film keeps the realistic aspect as one sees how Rosemary remembers the eyes in her dream, and that there's nothing really supernatural about it, and that everything up to this point in the film could have happened in real life. Not giving the actual image of the baby makes the audience's mind run rampant. And as horror film master Alfred Hitchcock once said, now, even thinking and talking about this movie right now still runs a chill down my spine. And this is because Polanski places his audience in this metaphysical point of view, but also this literal point of view in watching her eyes. Like the audience, Rosemary's putting together these clues, and the audience knows exactly what she's seeing and feeling. Polanski not only shows that Rosemary is not in control, but he puts his audience into the same emotional state. The audience feels uncertain the entire film, from when Guy talks to Rosemary to when she's not able to keep the neighbors out of her own space. Now, a more modern audience can get frustrated because they know that she's drinking the devil herbs, but the submissiveness shows the very real power of the patriarchy both then and now. She's clearly wrong for not liking this dessert, and for someone to explain the scratches from somebody who's had sex with her while she was passed out, as if sexual violence and also rape are completely okay as long as you're married to them. And her main physician, Dr. Saperstein, even tells her not to read books, as this would be a ridiculous thing for a woman to do. Now, in all seriousness, the film also shows how male society looks down on female sexuality and the pregnant female body. Now, once Rosemary separates from Dr. Saperstein and goes to see Dr. Hill, who isn't one of the Satanists, and she tells him that Dr. Saperstein is her doctor, he instantly thinks she's crazy. Even though there's evidence that she may be right, she's crazy because Dr. Saperstein is the pinnacle of intelligent people on this planet Earth. The film essentially then shows how Rosemary struggles to reclaim her own body. The film shows how the patriarchy has controlled women and its continuing cycle today. If you look back in May, when Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a law that bans abortions when a fetal heartbeat is detected, which can occur at 6 weeks. And it doesn't allow for exceptions such as rape or incest, or allow the procedure to be held for, quote, medical emergencies. Now, this law allows for any citizen to sue anyone who helps a woman receive this abortion after a heartbeat is detected, and somebody who could get at least $10,000 from that provider in damages. Now, this obviously challenges the concept of the 1973 landmark Supreme Court case that establishes a woman's legal right to an abortion in Roe v. Wade. Now, one of the issues with this is that in the Texas legislature, there hasn't been a lot of women representation. In the entire state history, there has been 5,444 men elected to serve and only 179. Now, since this law bans abortion after approximately 6 weeks of pregnancy, and this is before many people know that they're actually pregnant, approximately 85 to 90% of people who obtain abortions in Texas specifically are at least 6 weeks into pregnancy. So this law essentially ends all abortion care in the state. This law provides incentives for individuals, not doctors, and not the people involved to enforce this ban. So if, for example, I saw somebody getting an abortion, I, as a non-doctor, don't know who this person is, I can now sue them and they will be penalized up to $10,000 because I think that they helped it out. Obviously, I would have to prove it, but that's the problem. It's not about the people who are actually going through it. Now, this also pushes a pregnant woman trying to find help having to drive no longer from only 12 miles to about 250 miles away to get help. And additionally, it also disproportionately hurts people who already face discriminatory obstacles to accessing healthcare, which includes people of color and those on low income and those those living in rural areas, because people struggling to make ends meet means that care is delayed anyway. And before this law was even put into effect, Texas has prohibited coverage of care like this through its Medicaid program and also all private insurance plans. The reason why this is an issue is that, again, no matter what your personal viewpoint is on it, abortion is up to the woman in this specific situation, because not all laws applies to every person's situation. The governor of Texas said, when asked about how are they going to stop rape from happening,
Texas will work tirelessly to make sure that we eliminate all rapists from the streets of Texas by aggressively going out and arresting them and prosecuting them and getting them off the street.
The issue here is they're going to go out and arrest rapists, but it forgets the concept of what rape is. A rapist is essentially defined as somebody who has raped somebody, which means that the action of rape has already happened. So you can't arrest somebody prior to them doing the raping. So this idea that we'll arrest all rapists who are out on the streets of Texas doesn't do anything to prevent the raping in the first place. Yes, anyone who rapes should be put in front of the law, but how are you going to know that before it happens?
Their name is embedded in the grain of wood. Since each piece is unique, the shape and grain is unique. The shape and grain is impossible to forge.
I'm sure you all understand the legalistic drawback to pre-crime methodology.
Pre-crime expects to see what you intend to do, only what you will do.
Then why can't they see rapes, or assaults, or suicides?
Which then kind of hurts the woman even more. She's been hurt psychologically or however by being raped in the first place. Then if she gets pregnant because of that, then she has to have the kid. And this takes away every aspect of it being a personal choice. Quick sidebar, anyone who counters this argument about free choice and how you hear at the end when I promote the vaccine. Yes, getting a vaccine is a technical personal choice, but if you didn't have an issue with getting any vaccine prior to this, then bringing up choice isn't the reason why you're rejecting getting the vaccine or wearing masks into establishments or whatever have you. I contour this with when you went to school, did you have to prove vaccinations? Most likely you did, or your parents did, because most people have to be vaccinated for chickenpox, diphtheria, polio, measles, HPV, tetanus. These are vaccinations that people have. The only people that really shouldn't be getting the vaccine if you're immunocompromised or you have an actual medical reason not to, and that goes across any vaccination, honestly. And if you didn't get those done or your records were faked or whatever, you are an anti-vaxxer. Don't deny it. That's how it is. Learn to accept the title because that's what it is. And no matter what I say, no matter what, you're going to object to it at this point, and there's nothing I can do about that. But you have to learn to accept that that's where you are, because if you didn't have issues with getting those in the first place, then your issue isn't with the choice of getting vaccine. The issue is because it's being politicized. Now, I'm not going to go into the science behind it because the science is out there, research is out there. You need to find it. It's been done, written in the correct papers, not on Facebook, not on Twitter, not on any social media aspect here, not even me. Go find the academic papers, look at the data, and look at people who are actually studying this on a day-to-day basis, not your own personal research. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then when it comes to masks, frankly, did you have a problem with places saying you need to wear a shirt inside of a restaurant, or maybe pants or underwear? This is the exact same thing. So make up your mind. I'm not trying to push politics here because the vaccination isn't something that should be politicized, but it is the unselfish thing to do to get vaccinated and help out your community. Get rid of politics and look at it from that angle, not red versus blue or whatever have you. Think of it that way. Go in, get vaccinated. Anyway, back to what I was talking about. This goes into, honestly, when it comes to the United States as a whole, we have the freedom in this country to an extent to choose what we want to do with ourselves. And as a man, honestly, I have a lot of choices that a lot of women don't have, simply by being a man. And that is a privilege. I don't have to think about looking into the back seat because of there's a possibility that somebody had snuck into the car while I wasn't there. And I'm not saying that this applies to every single woman in this country, and because that's obviously a very big generalization, but the fact that it does affect some people makes it worth listening to and makes it worth understanding. And maybe men shouldn't be in control of a woman's body when they don't know what it goes through. Yeah, guys can joke all the time about what certain pain pains are equal or worse than what a pain that a woman potentially goes through every single month. But we'll never know. And it's about listening and understanding that it's pain that they have to deal with simply because they are a woman. So at the end of the day, that's what this is about. And honestly, when it comes to abortion specifically, I've even talked to people who are against abortion but are against this law because of the fact that you can be against abortion and be for women's choices. And you can say to somebody, I don't think you should do it because I believe that life begins at conception. You can say that all you want because that's what you believe. And you are 100% in your right to believe that. But the problem is that when you use that belief and affects a woman who doesn't believe that, and you view that she's wrong for not believing that, because she knows what's good for her. No one else does. Even at the end of the day, once you're an adult, out of systemic issues that prevent such things, you are able to choose who and what you want to be in life. You get to make your own decisions and who are we as society to say that you're wrong for thinking that? Me personally, I do think that there's a certain point in the life cycle that maybe abortion shouldn't happen. Am I gonna tell this random woman on the street who's been raped that she's wrong for doing this? No, because I don't know her situation. I don't know all the details of what's going on in her life. It's not up to me to decide whether what's right and wrong for her. And at the end of the day, that's what this film is trying to demonstrate, that the patriarchy still exists even today. And even with its controversial director, to say the least, is why this film does beat the test of time. Rosemary as a character is shown really of how, honestly, she becomes defeminized in a way and shows that really she has no control over anything. Society says in the film that women must get married, move in with their husband, have a child. Then when she does the thing that only women can do, it is ripped from her by the Satanists. She's then told that the baby was a stillborn and that it's basically her fault. Then when it's revealed that the baby is quote unquote alive, she's told to be the mother to her child. It's the right thing to do. And then she rejects this, but then is convinced when she hears the baby cry. She succumbs to this motherly intuition, and then the camera pulls out. She is thus in this world of the patriarchy where she has never been in control of her body, and that's just going to continue on over and over again. Now, this film may be called Rosemary's Baby, but the child is anything but hers. And this film is a real masterpiece in filmmaking that is really supplemented by all aspects. It has an original soundtrack composed by Christoph Komeda, and the main musical theme is called Rosemary's Lullaby, and it's a fairly simple melody with no lyrics, but the tune is sung by Pharaoh in a very childish but also unsteady voice that's slightly out of tune, and this appears several times in the film in a fairly different variation, and that is adjusted to the tension of each scene, which in itself makes the film tense all the way from the beginning of the film throughout it to the final shot. And this film is by far one of the most haunting and horrific films that I have ever seen. It has zero jump scares and little to no violence portrayed. There are very few characters in horror movies that have the same level of sympathy that Polanski gives to Rosemary throughout the entire film. One could even feel sad for her by the end of it, and this is a reaction that the horror genre doesn't really give often, if at all. And the frightening thing about Rosemary's situation is that the people and the situations that happen around her are presented as completely normal. And the scariest thing in the world is this lonely person yelling out for help, and everyone's just going about their own day, ignoring it. And the only people that you think are close to you are actually the ones ruining your life. Or they're outsiders and they think you're crazy. That's why this film is absolutely amazing. And frankly, again, this film has really beat the test of time. And what did y'all think of the movie? Let me know. Hit me up on social media.
The Formal Review is on Facebook, Twitter, and the Gram, and also YouTube. The handle's all the same. It's at The Formal Review. And for anyone who has supported me on a financial basis, I thank you very much for supporting me in that way. For anyone who wants to support, you can go to anchor.fm/The Formal Review and click support this podcast, and any donation is appreciated. Thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, wash your hands, get vaccinated, or if not, wear a mask. And I'll see you at the movies.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Formal Review. Cheers, and we'll see you next time.